Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, Breaking the Cycle of Anxiety, Finding Calm Within the Storm, happened on April 11th, 2023, as a Science and Spirituality Dialogue with psychologist Ann Friedman, researcher and thought leader Jud Brewer, Tibetan meditation master Geshe Tenzin Wangyal, and host Alejandro Chaoul. This was part of a year-long series on embracing life with wisdom and compassion. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome everyone to Cyber Sangha, this wonderful space, the brainchild of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. And this space, we, free teachings and dialogues, and I'm delighted to be the host today. My name is Alejandro Chaoul of this dialogue about anxiety, a very important topic. This cycle, this year, we're doing all different and different aspects of emotions that might take us out of who we want to connect with inside, kind of what Rinpoche many times calls our pain identities. And today we're going to touch on anxiety, on breaking the cycle of anxiety and finding calm within the storm. And we have two wonderful speakers joining us, joining Rinpoche in this dialogue. And one of them is my colleague, Ann Friedman. And Ann is a Ph.D. in psychology. She, as she will tell us, she experienced anxiety and through that found mindfulness. And now she's a mindfulness teacher. And she's done great work in this area, both in her training as well as applying it to different areas, to different schools, to corporations, and all these aspects of bringing what she's learned into her job, actually. So it's been amazing to see that. And Jud, many know Jud from his research at Brown University, and specifically on this topic, he has done research on mindfulness, on anxiety, and his last book is called Unwinding Anxiety. So perfect for this topic. And of course, Rinpoche doesn't want me to introduce him much, but I'll say a few words of Rinpoche, being born in India in a Tibetan family, studying in a Tibetan context in a monastery with his great teacher Lopon Tenzin Namdak, and then coming to the West and bringing these teachings and finding ways of bringing them in a way that makes sense to us. And I found in the 30 years that I've been studying with him that he has been studying us. And as he studies us, he says, how can these teachings be applicable for the Western mind, or for the human mind, for that, and the human heart? So thank you all for being here for this dialogue. I wanted to start with Ann. And particularly because in this cycle that we're doing, people are really interested in how the experience of these different. Last time we spoke about depression, and we had Juanita Rasmus, and we had Norman Farb, and so today with anxiety, I wanted to start with you, Ann, and I know you've shared this story before, and it's so powerful that if you can share it with this audience.
I'd be delighted to. Thanks, Ale. So I was from a high-functioning family, a lot of expectations of myself growing up. But I never imagined that I would have panic attacks. So I actually was a psychologist, still am. I trained at the University of Houston, did my internship at UT Health Science Center and my postdoc at Baylor College of Medicine. So very good training. And I was teaching in the graduate program at the University of Houston when our house flooded and we had to move to an apartment, and my mother started having brain seizures. I had a bad health checkup. My husband was switching jobs. It was thing after thing after thing. And I wasn't handling it well and ended up having panic attacks. And my husband said to me, honey, what the heck is happening to you? I've never seen you like this. And I said, I'm having panic attacks. And he said, you're a psychologist, do something. And I was totally humbled. Here it is, a mental health worker having a mental disorder. Brought me to my knees. I had 2 major attacks in 2006. And I am so grateful for that experience because it helped me find mindfulness and it changed my life. That spring, I saw an advertisement about a mindfulness retreat, a Jewish mindfulness retreat, and I'm Jewish. And the teacher, I went to it, and the teacher had studied Zen in Japan. He'd also studied Sufi meditation, a wide breadth of knowledge, Jewish meditation. But we did the traditional meditating 45 minutes beginning at 5:30 in the morning of sitting, walking, sitting, breakfast, sitting, walking, sitting, lunch. And I thought, oh my gosh, I studied the brain for 7 years and I am clueless about the brain. When I watched my own, I had been in therapy, but never sat and watched this wily critter up here and how tricky it can be. And it was a true learning experience that took me several days to coming out of my skin, feeling like I can't do this, before I began to settle and realized I'd found the path. So I worked with this teacher for many, many years until, unfortunately, he has passed away, and I now have a new teacher that I continue to work with, and I will always have a teacher.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Jud, I know that you've done research in this area, and I wanted to ask you before that, do you have any personal experiences that you want to share too that brought you to this kind of research?
Sure. Certainly I'm nodding my head listening to Ann's story. So I actually didn't know that I had a lot of anxiety at the end of college when I was starting medical school, but just figured I was stressed out and this and that, and had started meditating as part of medical school and found it very, very helpful for my own life. And similar, in medical school, we didn't learn a whole lot about the mind. We certainly learned about neurons and synapses and neurotransmitters and things like that, but not really anything about how the mind worked. I shouldn't say not that much. And then during residency, when I was in my psychiatry residency, I started getting panic attacks myself. So, the nice thing was that I'd been practicing 10 or more years at that point. And so my practice kicked in. And at that time, I was using a Southeast Asian practice called noting practice that was popularized by Mahasi Sayadaw. And it really helped me be able to notice all of the very unpleasant aspects of a panic attack, but be less identified with them. And basically, woke up in the middle of the night with my first panic attack. Was in a habit of kind of noting my experience, like, oh, there's a thought, there's that sensation, there's this, and then when it finished, I went, my mind, I was in training, was like, oh, check. I just had a panic attack, because I'd been learning the criteria. And then I went back to sleep, probably in a sleep deprived state from being in residency. And so after several more of those, just really, and I like how you said that, Ann, just bowing to this as a teacher, was really grateful to see that I could have full-blown panic attacks and not get caught up into the point where I would develop panic disorder, where I started worrying about future panic attacks. And also really appreciated the power of these practices where, if I can write out a full-blown panic attack with some mindfulness practice, wow, So the other thing I'll mention is that in residency and medical school, I never learned that anxiety could actually be driven like a habit. And my lab had been studying habit change and habit formation. We'd done work with smoking and with overeating and things like that, and using mindfulness training to help with these. But somebody in we have this app called Eat Right Now, and somebody in that program said, hey, could you develop a program for anxiety? Because I'm stuck in this loop where anxiety is triggering me to eat and I can't get out of it. And this went back to, these core foundational elements of Buddhism, like dependent origination. We'd even published some papers suggesting that was the first mention of what we now think of as positive and negative reinforcement. So these psychological things that we learn in college, even in high school, college, grad school, people Eric Kendall got the Nobel Prize showing that this is evolutionarily conserved, back to the sea slug. Yet this was all described beautifully by the Buddhist theories. And here, not only could I apply them myself when I was having a panic attack, but also we developed a program called Unwinding Anxiety, where we could test to see if these worked. And long story short, we got a 67% reduction in anxiety, 67% reduction in anxiety in people with generalized anxiety disorder in a randomized controlled trial that we now published a couple of years ago. And then we replicated the study with people who are having sleep disturbances, et cetera. And so found a pretty strong effect where the bottom line is if we can learn how our minds work, we can learn to work with our minds and also learn to put our minds to work for us. To help us work with, really challenging things like anxiety and panic attacks. So it's been really helpful for me clinically as well, because, the best medications out there, the number needed to treat is 5.2, meaning about 1 in 5 of my patients is going to show a significant reduction in symptoms with the best medications. In our studies, we found that number needed to treat, that's the official term for it, was 1.6. So, a bit more likely that somebody's going to benefit than with medication, which is really promising that we can put our minds to work for us. So yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
Thank you, Jud. Rinpoche, many times you tell us students that when we have something like anxiety or anger, any aspect, you said, where do you go? Do you go to your medicine, or do you go to your practice, right? And you trained in a monastery. Can you tell us a little bit how these things were dealt with, if they came up, if they were talked about?
Thank you. First of all, I'm happy to be here. So in the monastery, when we are trained, learning, meditating, we have never talked about anxiety to start with. So the anxiety word is a new word for me as I'm coming in the West. So in the monastery, we never talked about it. So what I think in generally in the teachings they talk about it is, you see, it's a mind. You have a mind and you have a body and then you have a breath. So anxiety, manifestation of anxiety, I think in some sense, it's the mind, breath, and the body. So if you think about the mind, think about small self and a big self. So you have two self which can be cause or condition of anxiety. So if it's a big self, then there's no anxiety. Big self, the who you are, have no reason to get any anxious about it, because It doesn't changes anything. It doesn't loses anything. It always sees itself as full, perfect, complete. So it always comes down to the idea of the small self. And then the question is, your small self is how small it is. The smaller it is, the more anxiety you will feel. The greater you can make it, the less anxiety you will feel. So this question about journey from small self to big self is a big journey, or ability to reflect within the small self, saying, for example, or whatever you are worried about, anxious about, as you can think about that as maybe this is not a reason to worry. Maybe this is not that bad. Maybe I actually I'm not able to see how good things are. So you reflecting from the openness to see the same situation, what makes you anxious can make you actually smile, laugh, love, feel peace. You can change the actual experiences of that situation with the perspective of shift. So that perspective of shift is where more sense of reflection, small self is helped by reflecting, by little bigger self is helping the small self to say, come on, you don't look at that one. This is good. This is not bad. So that dialogue goes in ourself, right? So I think so there's a two main journey. And then of course, in terms of the breath, I think breath plays a very important role. So, and it comes down to, I think, what Jud was saying, and interesting, the idea of, as Ann, I think you said also about many people who feel a panic attack. One of the things what happens to them frequently, they're worried about it happening again. So since it happened one time, you identify with it, and that identity is afraid of it's happening again. So, but usually we think about what will happen to me. We don't think about who is happening to. We ignore that part. So that's the key in the practice is the key. Who is happening to? Can I change that person? Rather than what's happening to me, can I change the experience? But if you address it properly, then you clearly look, someone is afraid of it, to happen again. Just simply being aware of that, I think it really helps a lot. And then another thing I think what Jud said was interesting. It's building a habit of anxiety. So once again, if you are frequently anxious, you identify with it. I am the anxious person. I'm different from you. I get anxious, and it's normal for me. And I'm ready to get another one soon, just if you don't shut up or whatever. If you're not trying to be kind to me, I'm ready to get another time anxious. So that identification, I think, always continuously play a very, very important role in anxiety. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you. So either Ann or Jud, if you want to talk about this aspect of identification and what Rinpoche brought about the breath. I know we talk a lot about the mind and thinking of, how neuroscience can look at the mind, but the breath seems to be crucial here. So if any of you want to talk about that.
Well, yes, I guess for me, I didn't understand when my mother used to tell me when I was a little girl and I was nervous about giving a class report, take some long, slow, deep breaths, that she was telling me science. And that in fact, we can activate the parasympathetic nervous system of rest and digest through the breath, which, I now practice regularly. So the breath has been very, very important to me anytime I feel at all tense. But what has been equally as important for me was sitting and watching the ways that my mind attempts to construct and predict, which I knew through cognitive behavioral therapy that many people did, but I didn't realize the extent that all people do, including me, until I sat and watched the way my mind would try to jump to answers, try to make assumptions about things that were completely wrong over and over again. So the key practice for me from the get-go was, can you know it's true, and backing off of it. And then learning a lot of equanimity and compassion. So it's been a combination of practices that have really, really helped me. I've never had another panic attack since 2006.
Yeah, and I'll just add this aspect of the habit of self, where we can be. There was somebody, an early pilot tester of our unwinding anxiety program, who sent me an email saying, "I feel like this is deeply etched in my bones." This deep etch. And was asking, how do I work with this, because they were so identified with their anxiety. And so this, when we feel anxious and we start to worry, and then we think, yep, that's who I am, then it just feeds this vicious cycle. And then we feel like this is all I am. And it will, often, a lot of anxiety is about the future. And we start thinking into the future, oh no, and this is the way it's always going to be, which just causes more suffering in the moment. And the irony is that in the moment, that's the opportunity to step out of these cycles.
Yeah, it's like, for example, when people feel anxious, so you can notice that in your breath. You can also notice that in your facial expression. So like you will be feeling very down, and you don't have to look at the mirror. You can, if you observe your facial muscles expression, you can already feel that you are anxious. And the moment, it's hard to change talking about the big self or even small self or different kind of small self or self-reflection. And all these might be difficult for someone to do it, because people who don't know about these knowledge and meditation and all of that. But at least if they observe that, their face, they say, just shifting the muscles in their face, they know how does the smile look like, how does the sadness look like. They can shift the muscle, even they have not changed the primary cause of the mind. They have not even changed the small self, big self, the breath, but even changing the muscle. You're telling to the anxiety, I know you're here. The communication takes place this moment you shift the muscles of the face. I think that really, really helps a lot. It's a very simple thing, maybe even some point, maybe even silly thing to do in the middle of the night. You're smiling in your bed in the dark room by yourself, but that might change your sleep. Absolutely,
Thank you, Rinpoche. So yeah, Ann and Jud, what are signs for you? Is it the face? Is it, that you notice and that you can shift now that, that you have these practices? What happens? What can you share with the audience that is going through things like that they can notice, oh, this is happening to me and this is what I can do?
So for me, it is noticing if my mind returns often to the same topic. So if I'm not focused in the moment and my mind's drifting and it keeps going off with a repetitive topic, that means that I've got a strong emotion going on. And for me, that's stop. I've got to stop, take a breath, observe what is going on with me. What is my mind believing? And then, do some practices to equanimity, compassion, to let go. And it's been a game changer. And I will notice it with the smallest of things, even just shoulders getting tight, right? Through the body, I can feel something's not quite right here. Mm-hmm. It feels like, I call it the Pac-Man that is just gnawing at you to turn around, pay attention to me, this feeling, right? Look at me. And as soon as we do, we can calm it, in ways. It's miraculous. I wished I'd known the practice when I had the panic attacks in 2006, John. That would have helped a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just make a little comment on Ann. So, like as Ann saying that, the kind of watching yourself, and very interesting that you going back to the same topic again and again, right? You don't want to think about it, you don't want to feel about it, and you're trying to take some deep breathing that you have learned, and then suddenly, before even you finish the breathing, you're back to the topic. And you even forgot that you started to do a meditation on a breathing. So what happens, I think that the really interesting point is there, it's you cannot change action unless you change the one who is acting. I say, in order to get rid of, it's easy to get rid of alcohol, but it's harder to get rid of alcoholic person. So the person, if there's no any change shift in the person, the person will always find it, the alcohol, right? So if person does not need it, alcohol even can be there, doesn't make difference. So I think this sense of really addressing who is feeling, right? I mean, then as I said earlier, question about big self, who, if there is somebody who has that knowledge, I think greatest method for sure. And who does not have that knowledge, then there's question about small self, who is afraid. My fear is feeling anxiety. Why my fear is feeling very anxiety? Because I'm feeling I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose this. I'm going to, whatever it is. Then you look from a little bit more bigger perspective of the same situation. You feel you don't have to worry about it. Maybe you feel if you lose this job, this will be fine. I will be fine. Maybe you can say, I don't care, I lose that job. You feel more confidence. I'll find a better job. Because you keep on building more confidence in no matter what situation is. And those shift in person's identity, that actually then will not repeat the same story again. Because you can force yourself to not pay attention to that. But if nothing changes the person, it's going to repeat again and again for sure.
Thank you. Jud, you said something before that reminds me of this, and I'm trying to remember the exact words, but this feeling that sometimes anxiety is all of my being, all of my person, right? Almost like if I'm going to use Rinpoche's words, kind of my big self is now all full of anxiety, and can I re-identify that this is not me? That it's actually just a small self that is the anxiety, and I still have this bigger self. Is that something that it's part of unwinding anxiety? Is that part of your experience? If you can share any of that.
Yes. So one of the aspects of helping, and this even lines up with some of the neuroscience research that my lab had done over 10 years ago now with experienced meditators, looking at where we found there's a network of brain regions called the default mode network, which is ironically what we default to when we're not doing anything else. And that default mode network is self-referential. So we tend to default to thinking about ourselves. Often that's regretting things we've done in the past, worrying about the future. And both of those activities have been shown to activate the default mode network. And what we found was experienced meditators actually deactivate that default mode network during meditation and even have what seemed to be altered connectivity. They don't talk to other regions of the brain in the same way that non-meditators do. What we've subsequently found is that seems to line up with this feeling of like this closed down, contracted experience. So when we're anxious, we feel, people tend to report feeling closed down or contracted. That Pac-Man is gnawing at us. It doesn't make us feel open and expanded. And when we're meditating, or also when we're being mindful in the moment, I think of it as really when we're simply being curious. When we're curious, we open to our experience, and that also deactivates the default mode network. And so one pragmatic aspect that we found and we use in our Unrunning Anxiety program is really about helping people awaken their natural capacity to be curious. And one simple way to do that is to notice. So in Rinpoche, you mentioned the face. There's the term in science they call the somatic memory, where when we have a certain facial expression that can be associated with emotions. And so we can even make that facial expression, it can elicit that emotion. Or when there's an emotion, it elicits that facial expression. And as you demonstrated your facial expression, when we tend to be anxious, our eyes tend to be narrowed or closed down. And when we're curious, they tend to be open. Oh, what's going on? So I have people pay attention to that tone of voice that's going on, behind the scenes, where it's like, oh no. When we're worrying, it's like, oh no. And maybe our eyes are narrowed, maybe our face is showing that we're anxious. Oh no, as we're worrying. And then we can go, oh, I'm worrying. And we can get curious about what that worry feels like in the body. And what that does is that curiosity opens us to see these phenomena, these sensations, these emotions, these thoughts that are just coming and going. And that helps us tap into the less identified aspect of experience. So when it's, oh no, it's all about me, that small self. Oh no, what's going to happen? Is this always going to be this way? Is this ever going to change? All those things where we can go, oh, that's a thought. Who owns a thought? Oh, it's a thought. It's coming, and it's often, by the time we go looking for it, it's gone. And there's another thought. There's another thought. So we can start to identify those habit loops. And when we do this pragmatically, is we have people map out these habit loops. Like, what's the trigger? The behavior tends to be worrying or distracting oneself or doing something as a way to avoid the feeling of anxiety. And then what's the result of it? Often when we worry, we just get more anxious. So just being able to map out the process, we can see this as an impersonal thing that's happening. Our brain just happens to get stuck in this habit loop. And ironically, it's a survival mechanism that's not helping us survive, because anxiety is not helpful for survival. And once we can recognize those habit loops and recognize the thoughts and recognize the behavior of worrying, that helps us be less identified with it, so that it's easier to step out of it and into that large, the larger self, or the non-self aspect of experience.
Yeah, maybe just as Jud's saying about, it's the idea of curiosity. So there's a two thing happening, right? One, you're having experiences of anxiety in your body, experiences of anxiety in your emotions. So the emotions and thoughts. But then there is someone there who is saying, I'm curious. The one I'm curious is different than the one who is feeling anxious. It's one little level has shifted up. It's not still a big self, but little mini baby step toward bigger self than the self which is identifying with anxiety. That shift, I think, is a so important, critical thing to address and talk and trying to work with that, rather than getting caught up too much with the experiences of anxiety itself. Because anxiety experience it can shift very fast when that shifts. When that doesn't shift, no matter what you're trying to teach yourself, tell yourself, and do different kind of fancy meditation, but the same person who is anxious is doing the relaxing meditation, doesn't work. Another one has to do the relaxing meditation, so that then it will work, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. And so the practice that I most often use, which I know you all know, is the RAIN practice, where we recognize the emotion, label it. And usually there's a mix of emotions, right? It's not just a single emotion. Find and then identify the strongest of those. But I think, Jud, I'm not a neuroscientist, but that I did do a postdoc in neuropsychology, that actually our brains calm when we just recognize anxieties here and just label it, right? There's some science around this. And then in addition to that, we move from there into full acceptance that we can be with this, that it's just an experience, like a thought, like a rain on our head, just something happening in this moment that's passing through that we can just be with. And then investigating that curiosity that Jud was talking about, investigating, how is this manifesting? What does it look like in my body? Can I breathe with it? Noticing that, sensations are shifting and changing. And then again, bringing the equanimity and compassion, which I have found to be the key for me. But it just all of a sudden, it transforms. It transforms.
Thank you. So this aspect of transformation or breaking the cycle, and I know, Ann, you mentioned in passing this stop, like the stop formula, right? That many probably in the audience know of. Stop and kind of disengage from the fight or flight response and take a deep breath and be open and just notice. And then when you're ready, you proceed, but maybe it takes a few breaths. This is one way of breaking the cycle. We've had, with the sensations of noticing in the face, as Rinpoche was saying. I want to come back to the breath. Are there particular breathings that, and I know there's so many, right, in the practices, whether it's in mindfulness and yoga and different kinds of meditation and Tai Chi, there's so many breathings, but are there things that you use that are your go-to practices? You mentioned rain. Are there other things that more related maybe with breath or with movement?
Well, certainly. Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, Jud.
I was going to say one of my favorites is something that I learned from somebody who uses mindfulness training with children. It's called 5-finger breathing, where I'm sure many folks are familiar with this, where, as we breathe in, we trace up the outside of one of our fingers. As we breathe out, we trace down the inside, and as we breathe in, we trace up. And so you can imagine over the course of 5 breaths, we've traced our hand, 10 breaths, we've traced back. And the one thing I like about that is it lines up with some of the neuroscientific theories around working memory, where we don't have a lot of space in the part of the brain, the network. I mean, it's not as simple as just a part of the brain, but there's a brain region associated a lot with working memory called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And working memory seems to be able to hold only a few pieces of information at one time. Imagine trying to remember, 4 or 5 pieces of information before, going to the grocery store or something like that. It's hard to remember much more than that. And so if that's true, then if we're paying attention to 3 aspects of physical sensation, so the physical sensation of the breath, physical sensation on one finger, and physical sensation on another finger, that's 3 things. And then we're paying attention to looking at our hand, that's 4. We can basically reboot our working memory processes by simply paying attention to the breath as we're doing this 5-finger breathing process. And as part of that, it kind of reboots, and we might notice that, the physiology, we tend to calm down a little bit just by doing those 5 mindful breaths. So when those thoughts come back online, if we have worry thoughts, they're like, oh, you should be worried. And our body's saying, oh, I'm not really feeling it. And there's a mismatch where they have to kind of be attuned to each other. So if we're thinking anxious thoughts and we're feeling anxious feelings, they tend to feed off of each other. But if we're thinking anxious thoughts and we're not really feeling it, it's much easier to just notice there's a thought, and just let it come and go, as compared to kind of getting caught up in it or being identified with it. So I'm a big fan of the 5-finger breathing because it's, whether we understand the neuroscience or not, it's very pragmatically helpful for people. And especially for people that have children, if they as parents are feeling anxious, their kids want to come and help them. They can tell that their parents are anxious, so they can teach this to their kids, and then their kids can come and help and say, hey, let's do some 5-finger breathing together. And then they get to help their parent calm down, which is really empowering for their child at the same time.
So 5-finger breathing, is it like a 5, or is it like a different, the length, how deep they are? Because the 5-finger have 5 sides, right?
Oh, yeah. So it's really just about tracing at the speed of the breath. So even if, say, my middle finger is longer, I'm just going to trace up a little faster if my breath, just to keep pace with my breath. Yeah. So it's not even trying to regulate the length of the breath. It's simply to pay attention as we pay attention to our breathing.
So, Jud, I've used the 5-finger breathing with children, but I find adults find it just as helpful. Absolutely. And long, slow, deep breaths where we lengthen the exhales, almost double the length of the inhales. That's a go-to for me. I do a kind of a 3-2-6 but I'm blowing it out till I can't blow any longer before I take the next inhale. I have clients who like box breathing, breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. So yeah, there are lots of good breathing exercises, but would say, Ollie, that if somebody is in a full-blown panic attack and they are hyperventilating, I wouldn't take them to their breath. I would take them to, and I've had 2 full-grown men come into my office in full-blown panic attacks. One showed up at 8 in the morning with his wife. I didn't even know these people, saying, I didn't know where to go. And we just saw your office, so we're coming here to see if you can help. But we did 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding, where I had them describe in extreme detail 5 things they could see, 4 things they could hear, 3 things they could feel, 2 things they could smell, and then the taste in their mouth. The key is in the description. If you try to just say, oh, I see a clock and a vase or whatever, it doesn't work. You have to describe. And during the process of describing in detail them out loud, the mind begins to let go because it's focused on the present. So for me, I've seen that one work very well with people who are in full-blown panic attacks.
What about any coming to the body? I liked, Jud, how you were saying, if the anxiety that, we feel in the mind, but the body is somewhere else, right? So if we know what makes us be in the body somewhere else, whether it's some exercise or movement or yoga or whatever it is, and you training that, is that anything that helps you be in this place? So when the mind is here, kind of, it's like, oh, I'm fine with you.
I think the idea of the breath, when you're talking about the body, so when we feel anxiety, it's already in the body as we're talking about the facial expression, but it's also kind of energetically in your chest and upper back. You're holding somewhere, right? So, and when you say hold somewhere, when you hold, and according to this Tibetan teaching, they are held together with the air, the prana. Prana is what contracting in a particular location in the body, like you're holding in the heart, any organs, any part of your body. So when you do use the breath needs to be coincide with awareness of where the things are in your body. So if, for example, when Ann talking about the twice longer exhalation, when you exhale, you don't just exhale the breath, but you exhale breath through that area of the body, because those area of the body where these toxic airs are contracted together. When I'm breathing, I'm not just nostril breath, I'm breathing. Right now it's happening from my upper back, slow and deep. When in the end of exhalation, not only I feel like a breath-wise more restful, but also I feel much more restful in my body. My body is more releasing. And I keep doing it repeatedly for some time. The tension in my body, that area of the body is gone. So that already, I think, helps a lot in terms of anxiety.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Jud, did you want to go to that? I was asking before, is that made sense to you, or?
I don't think I'd add anything more at this point. Yes.
Okay. So, so about the body, I mean, it seems that clearly we can identify the anxiety in different parts of the body, and as Rinpoche was saying, we can bring that breath into those areas. So some traditions talk about different chakras, or even just different regions of the body. And again, as we bring attention into those areas, we can help it kind of liberate or open, or as Rinpoche says many times, kind of connects to the spaciousness of that place, of that area, and then through that connect to the spaciousness of the whole. So is any of that resonate to some of the practices that Jud or Ann that you do, or maybe you want to share any of that?
Well, certainly, I think that
leading a little practice. Now, maybe after Jud, you speak, then maybe Ann can, if you open to lead just maybe a few minutes, the actual practice, So I think we'll.
Well, I'll keep this very brief. The noting practice, and we've adapted the RAIN acronym to where the N stands for noting as compared to non-identification or nurturing or some of the others N's that folks like Tara Brach have brought forward. And so the idea is, recognize that we're anxious, allow that experience to be here because often we push it away. The I stands for investigation, where we get curious. Oh, what does this feel like in my body? And then we just note the physical sensations, and that helps us be able to bring in that spaciousness where we're less identified, or at times not even identified with the sensations, and just watching them come and go. So I think that fits with being able to tap into and meet the energy of the body and the energy of anxiety where it's at, where the anxiety can be very activating. And so, we can bring them in a very active process, whether it's noting or RAIN, or even, going for a walk and noting our experience and noting the experience around us to kind of meet the energy. So that's all I would add.
Thank you. And before I go to Ann, there's a question from the audience that it's interesting, and it has to do with a different kind of anxiety, which is we're talking about breathing, and breathing practices can be useful. So what happens with techniques for people that have lung disease? Have any explored that, and that kind of little anxiety that might happen if the breath practice?
I can just say briefly that this is where people can use grounding practices that are outside of the realm of the breath. So looking around, or the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 experience, where you're bringing in different experience of our senses, that it doesn't have to be centered around the breath. And I think grounding ourselves externally, like seeing and hearing, can be really helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, tools in a toolbox. Use the tool that works for you.
Great. And did you want to share? Do you want to lead a short practice with the audience?
I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to do a RAIN practice, and I do also use noting. So one of the things that I didn't really understand was that emotions are, basically chemical downloads in the body that are causing physical sensations. So one of the things that I use often is, this is just an unpleasant physical sensation that is going to pass, like they all do, right? They don't remain. So to get more grounded in the experience as just, that's all it is. It's going through. It's just another experience. Yeah. So I like the noting too, Jud, just to say that. Yeah. Okay. So inviting you all to get into a comfortable position, upright but not rigid, eyes closed or gazing downward. And beginning with long, slow, deep breaths, getting the air all the way down to your belly. And lengthening your exhales, really blowing out that tension and stress. You want to do at least 3 to 6 of these. And inviting you now to tune into your body, noticing if you're holding tension, relaxing forehead, softening eyes, releasing your jaw. With your next exhale, you might drop your shoulders down and back even more, opening your chest, letting go of tension, and neck, shoulders, arms, and hands, softening the belly. And if you're holding tension in your back, you might send a long, slow, deep breath to that area, imagining a pillow of air, easing it, releasing it a bit, relaxing pelvis, legs, and feet. Inviting you to notice what emotions are present for you. Or if you want to actually use something, think about a time recently where you have been anxious, bringing it to mind as if it's happening right now. Noticing perhaps what your mind is telling you. Don't go to a trauma, something highly anxiety provoking. Use something manageable as we train. And now letting go of those thoughts. Can you recognize the emotions that are present for you? Labeling them. Often there is a mixture of emotions. Maybe you're feeling a little anxious and fearful, or sad, confused. Just notice what emotions are there. And which is the strongest of those emotions? And can you allow or accept it? It's just a feeling, chemicals in the body. Creating body sensations. And if it helps to soothe, inviting you to put a hand or both hands on your heart. Noticing that you can breathe with this. And each time your mind returns to thinking about an issue, let it go and come back to the practice. Noticing now where the anxiety is taking up residence in your guest room, your guest house of your body. It may be in your shoulders, perhaps your throat or chest feel constricted. Your stomach churning, jaw tight. Maybe your head is spinning. We can just notice these are unpleasant body sensations. That's all they are. Breathing with them. And you notice how they shift and change. And now bringing yourself nurturance and not identifying with this experience. Inviting your big self, your large self, to say to the small self in this moment, you are as you are, perfectly imperfect, like everyone else on this planet. May you accept yourself just as you are. You could not be different. You are the perfect you, and you make mistakes like everyone else. Mistakes are opportunities to learn and grow. They benefit us. You are not alone. No matter what you are experiencing, millions of people on this planet have had the same experience today and are feeling just like you are. There are no new human stories, and our stories are universal. What you're going through is hard. It would be for anyone. And you've been through challenges before. And this too shall pass. Everything does. And we can always say something to ourselves that we would say to our dearest of friends in this same situation. And now deepening the breath once again. Letting go of the situation. And when you're ready, opening your eyes.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you. So let me see if there's any more questions in the audience. I don't see any. Before we conclude, I wanted to see if anyone has any other comments that you want to bring in. I'll start with Ann that is on the screen now. So, and then.
Well, just saying I went through that relatively quickly. If I were doing it with you in private, one-on-one, I'd be doing it a little bit slower. But these practices have been a godsend for me, a gold mine. And I very much encourage you all to use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the breathing, the rain practices, and to again realize that this big self that is really within all of us is whole and healthy. It's there. We need to connect with it.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ann. Jud, anything else that you may want to add?
Nothing from my end, just that I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope it was beneficial for others.
Thank you. Rinpoche?
Same, I think sitting with this quiet after this meditation. So thank you, Ann and Jud, for coming, joining us, and I'm sure our audience really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I really appreciate this. It's been great to be with you in this dialogue. Just for the audience, this is being recorded, so it's available later too. And just a few notes about a few upcoming events. So the next emotion in our list, or the next topic that we'll address, is loneliness. And so on Thursday, May 4th, at noon, New York time, Rinpoche will teach about and lead a meditation on embracing loneliness and cultivating connection. And then the next day, May 5th, is our full moon, and we do a 24-hour meditation that goes from, we start in the US, we pass the baton to Finland, and it goes all over the world and in different languages. So welcome, and it's all the events here are free, so you're welcome to join any. And then the next dialogue is actually on the 11th as well, on May 11th at noon Eastern time. And we'll have Sharon Salzberg, whose upcoming book on real life is The Journey from Isolation to Openness and Freedom. And from the research side, we'll have Emily Lindsay from the University of Pittsburgh, and with Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. So I welcome you all to all these events. And again, this aspect of Cyber Sangha, that wherever we are, we're still interconnected. Thank you. I also wanted to not forget to thank the people that we don't see and are here helping. Milos, who's been the technical support, Polly doing so many things to support Cyber Sangha, and also Mariela, who's been our chat host today. So thank you. And I know there's many others also to thank. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Jud. And thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Cyber Sangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.